Mihawk versus Shanks. This never-ending debate has plagued the One Piece community since what honestly feels like the dawn of time. Which is crazy to me, because I believe the answer is incredibly obvious. Based on everything we know at this current moment in time, Mihawk is stronger. The world's strongest swordsman is stronger than every other swordsman in the entire manga. It really should be that simple, but despite that, the majority of One Piece fans believe Shanks is stronger. As you can tell from the length of this video, there are countless talking points I'll be going through and countless counterpoints I will be attempting to debunk in order to substantiate Mihawk's claim as the stronger of the two. The tricky thing with power scaling in One Piece is that Oda can be a very ambiguous writer. He does not like to give you straight up, clear-cut answers, which leads to readers having various different interpretations, and in some cases, these opposing interpretations hold similar weight to one another, like the never-ending power scaling debate between the Yonko and the Admirals. But this, my friends, is not one of those tricky cases. In my many years of being a One Piece fan and actively engaging with the community, I have yet to see a single strong argument for Shanks being stronger. Hopefully by uploading this video, I do get to see that. I oblige anybody who disagrees with me on any point to leave your arguments in the comment section down below, or if you make videos, a video response would be even better, something I can possibly react to on a stream or even have a proper debate with you about. Despite how toxic this argument can be, it is very interesting to me to see how people come to these different conclusions. A couple years back, I made a video on this exact topic, but I have grown tremendously as a content creator since then, and more importantly, there has been a ton of developments in the manga itself and in third-party material that has created new arguments on both sides of this debate. So, here I am. It's quite rare to see a YouTuber in support of Mihawk being stronger, so I've decided to take this up myself. This video will be an extensive breakdown of Mihawk versus Shanks, with absolutely everything considered. A major misconception within the One Piece community is that the Yonko are the 4 strongest pirates in the world of One Piece. This was pretty much considered a fact by a subsection of the community until quite recently, when Buggy became a Yonko as a result of the Cross Guild's establishment. However, there was no precedence for this interpretation since forever. When Garp introduced the concept of the New World's Yonko, he referred to them as the 4 greatest pirates. There's a very important distinction between greatness and physical strength. In order to become a Yonko, there are countless things that need to be taken into consideration outside of pure physical strength. You need to rule over territories, have authority over various individuals even outside of your own crew, and of course, have strong subordinates within your crew. The title of Yonko is not a title of strength, it's a title of political power in the pirate world. If you're a newer One Piece fan, you'd be surprised to hear just how common this talking point was before 1053 was released. In fact, it still exists, with people simply calling Buggy an exception to the rule. Sure, there is a layer of comedy with this decision, but Oda's intention by making Buggy a Yonko is to demonstrate what really matters in the seas of the New World. Being immensely powerful can only take you so far. Buggy is the figurehead of the Cross Guild. He's the chairman of Buggy's Delivery Service, which is a pirate dispatch organization that capitalized on the void that Doflamingo's imprisonment left on the underworld. He is an incredibly powerful individual in the New World, despite being relatively weak in terms of physical strength. In order to become an emperor, you need connections, you need to rule over land, and you need widespread influence. The Yonko are pretty much kings in the world of piracy, and this is perfectly explained through Blackbeard's journey. After pulling up to Marineford, killing Whitebeard, flexing 2 of the strongest devil fruit abilities in the world, and terrorizing the entire battlefield, Blackbeard was still not considered a Yonko. It was only until the Payback War, a year later, between his own crew and the remnants of the Whitebeard pirates, that Blackbeard became a Yonko. And what was the determining factor in this decision? The fact that the Blackbeard pirates began to occupy all of Whitebeard's territory, turning it into their own. Gaining political influence and becoming a king of the New World is what made Blackbeard a Yonko, not just becoming physically powerful. Hopefully that debunks the most popular argument I've heard for Shanks being stronger than Mihawk, which is the fact that Shanks is a Yonko and Mihawk isn't, if we can even call that an argument. The most ironic aspect of this talking point is that Mihawk's title has nothing to do with political power and everything to do with sheer physical strength. And he's also one of the biggest reasons Buggy is now considered an emperor. By working alongside him, he single-handedly provided Buggy's organization ridiculous amounts of physical power, which was the determining factor in Buggy's case. Blackbeard and Buggy's journeys are opposites. Blackbeard only had power, and Buggy had everything but power. Before Mihawk, the world's strongest swordsman, joined him. Sekai Saikyo no Kenshi, literally the #1 swordsman in the entire world. No ifs, ands, or buts, and that brings me on to my next point. For a plethora of reasons, a lot of One Piece fans are convinced Shanks isn't a quote-unquote real swordsman who falls under the umbrella of Mihawk's title. The easiest counterpoint to this is the existence of this artwork. In December 2021, there was a fan-submitted artwork depicting various different characters. Zoro, Shanks, Mihawk, Law, Cavendish, Oden, Shiryu, Rayleigh, Roger, Hachi, Vista, and Kaku, all in a spread with the words One Piece Swordsman in the background. But as I said, this is a fan-submitted artwork, so it's obviously not an official confirmation in of itself. But there's more to this point, because this artwork is officially captioned by Oda himself, who stated the full lineup of swordsmen, when they cut, it hurts. Which means Oda considers all of those aforementioned characters, including Shanks, swordsmen, and by extension inferior to Mihawk, the world's strongest swordsman. Obviously, there are many officially confirmed swordsmen missing from this list of characters, like Kinemon, Brook, Izo, Kabaji, Johnny, Yosaku, and so many more, but what's particularly interesting about this artwork is that characters like King and Mr. One aren't included, and they make up the biggest arguments for people who believe in the idea of real or true swordsmen in One Piece. And that begs the question, if someone like King, who uses a sword, is not considered a swordsman by Oda, then what actually makes you a swordsman in One Piece? After much consideration and taking into account every single character who uses a sword, I firmly believe the best way to define a swordsman in One Piece is as an individual whose fighting style revolves around the use of a sword, which essentially means every character who is at their best as a fighter when using a sword is considered a swordsman, with no exceptions. And this is where things get complicated, because One Piece's overall power system is split into various branches. You have Devil Fruit users, there is Haki to consider, and then you have people with special abilities like King, who is a Lunarian. And thus, a lot of One Piece fans have come up with terms like pure swordsman or real swordsman or true swordsman to distinguish between characters like Zoro or Mihawk and Law or Kaku, the former being people who solely rely on their Haki, physical strength, and have expert skill with the blade, and the latter being people who use a combination of sword skill and Devil Fruit abilities. But there is no real precedence for these kinds of terms. Where has Oda ever used the terms true swordsman or pure swordsman? Where has Oda ever made a distinction between people like Law and Zoro? These are fan-made fallacies that honestly only exist to discredit Mihawk's title. Let me ask you guys a question. Is Law as powerful as he is with his sword without it? Do you guys think Law can fight at his best without his blade? I hope you all think he can't, because there's absolutely nothing to suggest he can. He depends on his blade to use his severing techniques, almost using it like a scalpel, and he uses it to parry his opponent's attacks. In chapter 662, he lectured Tashigi about the way of a swordsman. Why on earth would Oda write this if he didn't consider Law a swordsman? Simply because someone is using supplementary abilities in conjunction with their sword doesn't make them any less of a swordsman. And that brings me to King, the user of an ancient Zoan fruit and a member of the Lunarian race who also uses a sword. Many One Piece fans use the existence of King to discredit Mihawk's title and promote their agenda of differentiating between quote-unquote pure swordsmen and people who just use a sword. Which to me is pretty ironic, because King might be the final nail in the coffin for this argument. The existence of King actually further substantiates my understanding of what constitutes a swordsman. King is a canon example of someone who Oda clearly does not consider a swordsman despite them using a sword. Going back to the definition I previously outlined, a swordsman is someone whose fighting style revolves around the use of a sword. So King not being a swordsman actually makes perfect sense. If you take away King's sword, he isn't really disadvantaged. He has a very wild fighting style. He has no proper form or technique. He simply does anything he needs to do to land hits on his opponent, from hand-to-hand combat, his Pteranodon transformation, and his Lunarian abilities to emit fire. He attacks with his wings, with his beak, with his legs, and sometimes with his sword. But funnily enough, he uses his sword far less than any of his other weapons. King's sword is just one of many things he has in his arsenal. He doesn't believe you need a specific school or style to fight. He's a killer machine, as Zoro called him. None of the characters in the artwork of swordsmen are like this. They all depend on their sword as the bread and butter of their fighting style. They are all at their strongest when they're using their sword. And that's also why Mr. One is omitted from that artwork. He's a similar case to King. Daz Bones is a martial artist who is proficient in hand-to-hand combat, but his Devil Fruit ability allows him to turn any part of his body into a blade. Does that make him a swordsman? No, because his fighting style doesn't revolve around the use of a sword. He doesn't use a sword at all. He uses his Devil Fruit to turn his body into a blade and uses that in conjunction with his skill in the martial arts. Then, what about Kaku? He's also pretty similar to King in terms of having a wild fighting style and using everything he has at his disposal. He is proficient in Rokushiki, he has a Devil Fruit, he is proficient in Haki, but Oda still considers him a swordsman. Again, we go back to the definition I outlined. Unlike King, Kaku is at his best when he is using a sword. He was stated to be the most proficient swordsman in CP9. And unlike King, he has a specific form, a specific style. He uses Yontoryu, or the four sword style. Hopefully I've successfully addressed what constitutes a swordsman in the eyes of Eiichiro Oda, as there's no other definition for a swordsman in One Piece that is as logical and coherent as this one. So with that being said, let's bring it all back to Shanks. In every single combat scenario we have had involving Shanks so far, he is shown to be dependent on his sword. We saw him as a kid using his sword. In the battle against Shiki, he is shown using a sword. In his legendary sword duels against Mihawk, he obviously used the sword. When he met Ace, he reached for his sword. He clashed against Whitebeard with his sword. He blocked a Kainu with his sword. He challenged everybody in Marineford by brandishing his sword. Even in his confrontation with Green Bull, where his Conqueror's Haki was the primary factor, he is shown with his hand on his sword preparing for battle. With regard to the definition of a swordsman being at his best when using a sword, there is no reason to assume that Shanks is not a swordsman as of right now. Do we really think Shanks would willingly opt for a weaker fighting style in all of those scenarios? Against Whitebeard, another Yonko? Against Navy headquarters and Blackbeard, the man who gave him his throbbing scar? It honestly makes no sense, not just from a power scaling standpoint, but from a narrative and character perspective as well. Based on everything we know about Shanks, he doesn't like violence. He respected Colby for his bravery in standing up against the Kainu because of the needless bloodshed. His interference in Marineford was specifically because he couldn't idly stand by as people were dying. His entire reason for meeting Whitebeard and clashing with him is because he didn't want to see Ace in danger by pursuing Blackbeard. Why on earth would someone like this willingly nerf themselves when all that really accomplishes is drawing out battles, which means more violence? Due to Shanks having what is easily the most impressive Conqueror's Haki feat we've seen in the entire series thus far, many people have chosen to call him a Haki man. Not only is this a hilarious leap in logic to shamelessly promote a groundless and borderline delusional agenda, calling Shanks a Haki man displays a fundamental misunderstanding of swordsmanship in One Piece. Sword skill is synonymous with Haki skill for swordsmen, which includes Conqueror's Haki due to the developments in Wano and the introduction of advanced Conquerors and Conqueror's coating. Let's really think about this for a second. What even is Haki? The general understanding of Haki is that it is a power system, and while that is true to some degree, I think this is a limited understanding of what Haki actually represents. Haki is more of a constant law in One Piece's universe than a power system comparable to devil fruits. It's the manifestation of your willpower, something every single person can tap into with the knowledge of its existence and extensive training. Whether you're a swordsman, a sharpshooter, a martial artist, or a fighting cook who kicks a lot, Haki is something you need to learn and master to survive against top tiers regardless of who you are and how you fight. The level of proficiency you have in whatever fighting style you adopt has a ceiling, and Haki breaks through that ceiling and becomes your main focus. In order to become a master swordsman, you must become a master in Haki, in armaments, in observation, and for the very best, in conquerors. The biggest boost Zoro has had in terms of power in the entire series has come from growth in Haki, not him learning a new sword technique or gaining strength in his physicality. The only lesson we've ever seen Mihawk teach Zoro was in a Dressrosa flashback where he taught him about armament Haki hardening. Haki is not an exclusive power system. You literally can't be a Haki man. It functions as a supplementary multiplier to whatever type of fighter you are. It works in tandem with your existing abilities, which ultimately means Shanks is a swordsman regardless of how powerful his Haki is, and there's a very strong case for Mihawk having superior Haki to Shanks overall, as blasphemous as that may sound to many people watching this. If Mihawk is superior to Shanks, the chances are he has superior Haki as well. Mihawk's epithet is Hawkeye, and it was originally supposed to be clairvoyant. Both of those names imply that Mihawk's reaction speed and vision is one of his greatest skills, which is obviously attributed to observation Haki. Then we have the fact that Mihawk is the only person in the history of the series to have a black blade, with the exception of Ryuma, who is literally known as the god of the blade. Given the appearance of black blades looking as if they're permanently coated with armament Haki, we can infer the process of turning your blade into a black blade has something to do with mastering armament Haki. With regards to Conqueror's Haki, although Mihawk hasn't been confirmed to possess the incredibly rare ability, it's almost guaranteed that he not only has Conqueror's, but is very proficient in its usage. It would make no sense for Zoro's end goal, the strongest swordsman in the world, to not have an ability that Zoro himself has, the ability that proves the most important in battles against top tiers. Conqueror's Haki is explained as an ability reserved for those with the qualities of a king. It's the ability to exert your own willpower over others. Mihawk has literally the perfect profile for a conqueror, someone with the qualities of a king. He conquered the world of swordsmen. There's also the fact Zoro had knowledge of the existence of Conqueror's Haki in Fishman Island. How would he know of its existence if he had never seen it in action? With regards to how good Mihawk is with Conquerors, we honestly can't say for now, and I want to avoid getting into any headcanon within this video. At the very least though, he's as good as Zoro is right now, which says quite a lot considering Zoro can use advanced Conquerors. To summarize, there is simply no viable argument that Shanks is not considered a swordsman by Oda at this current moment in time. Why on earth would Oda make Shanks, the rival who Mihawk had legendary duels with, anything but a swordsman? In order to understand the rivalry between Shanks and Mihawk and how that has evolved over the years, we have to closely assess Mihawk's character. Everything about him in the story implies that he is lonely at the top, suffering from success. Dracul Mihawk is heavily inspired by the vampire Count Dracula of the famous gothic horror novel. I haven't personally read Dracula, so forgive me for my limited knowledge, but with a bit of research I noticed a bunch of similarities between Mihawk and Dracula. There's obviously Mihawk's name, Dracul. Dracula was the strongest vampire, Mihawk is the strongest swordsman. Both Dracula and Mihawk are very pale individuals and they live in big, dark, misty castles. And lastly, the most interesting similarity is the fact that the core themes of the novel Dracula are isolation and loneliness. These two ideas are absolutely crucial to the character of Mihawk. Through his Vivre card, we have received some pretty important information about Mihawk. It stated that he was famous ever since before the Great Age of Piracy even began. So, at the time of Roger's execution, he had already made a name for himself on a global scale. He trained relentlessly for many years, challenging more and more powerful foes, until he had no more worthy challengers. He looks forward to the day a Swordmaster will emerge to surpass even his rival, Shanks, meaning he is waiting for the day somebody stronger than Shanks can challenge him and entertain him. In the world of swordsmen, Mihawk stands at the top, alone and isolated. He is confident enough in his own ability to be able to tell Zoro that he will await for him at the top of the world. This is a promise to Zoro, an oath. Hell, even the title of the chapter is Oath. Mihawk is certain that nobody can interfere with this promise, even though he lacks allies, which is something he himself has referred to as the most terrifying power in the seas. He has no allies, he has no comrades, he is but one man. Yet he still has unwavering confidence in his own power. Mihawk doesn't view a one-armed Shanks as a worthy challenger. Shanks was the only person who could satisfy him back in the day, and he sacrificed his arm and in turn his rivalry with Mihawk. Every single powerful individual we know of has a rival of sorts. Roger had Whitebeard and Garp, the Yonko have each other, the Admirals have each other, but Mihawk, he lost his only rival 12 years ago. Now he's just alone, waiting for the green-haired kid to get strong enough to challenge him. And I think it's fair to say the loss of his rivalry with Shanks is what turned him into the bitter and lonely individual who we met in chapter 50. His unbelievable strength and success in the world of swordsmen turned Mihawk into a very self-centered and arrogant individual. This is emphasized in various points of the story, from the way he spoke to Zoro and referred to him as a frog in a well, to his quotes in Marineford where he tells some of the Whitebeard pirates that he doesn't remember the faces of every insect he crushes. He views himself as superior to everybody, including Shanks. He told him he doesn't fight one-armed has-beens. So here's a question to everybody watching. Is Mihawk just an absolute idiot? Is he just a fraud? Is he just stupid? Is Zoro's end goal just like devoid of any logic or reason? Why the hell wouldn't he take Shanks seriously if the entire concept for his character is this lonely, strong dude that is suffering from success and has no contemporaries that can challenge him? It just doesn't make any sense. Many people use the argument that Shanks becoming an emperor 6 years ago, 6 years after he lost his arm, means he became stronger after losing his arm. I've already established that the title of Yonko has less to do with power and more to do with influence, but let's just say for a second that this is true. I don't really have an opinion on this because whether Shanks is stronger or weaker now doesn't really change anything. The ultimate point is the fact that Shanks' potential was thwarted when he lost his arm. By losing his dominant arm, the ceiling for Shanks' potential was lowered dramatically. Besides that just being the obvious logical outcome, this can be justified through the narrative. Shanks himself stated that he wagered his arm on the new era, on Luffy. If losing his arm wasn't a big deal and didn't matter for Shanks, it completely invalidates one of the most important moments of the series. It invalidates the most important moment for his character. The reason I'm even addressing all this is because Mihawk's existence would make very little sense in retrospect if Shanks is stronger than him. His title of the world's strongest swordsman is also completely invalidated. A title that exists within One Piece mainly because it's the dream of arguably the second most prominent character in the story. Completely ignoring power scaling and portrayal for a second. The biggest reason Shanks being stronger than Mihawk makes no sense is because it destroys Zoro's goal. Imagine Oda just turned around and said, all the skepticism surrounding the All Blue was correct all along, and Sanji has been believing in a fallacy. The All Blue doesn't exist. It's literally the same thing. Mihawk is a character who was created for the sole purpose of being Zoro's final obstacle in the pursuit of his dream. Their battle is all but confirmed. It's definitely going to happen, and Zoro is definitely going to win. But if Shanks is somehow stronger than Mihawk, Zoro's title is made hollow. It's turned into a joke, a lie, something with no substance. And I think we can all agree that Oda is not that terrible of a writer. The final part of this video is dedicated to analysing Mihawk's performance in Marineford. There is a lot going on here that is used to slander and discredit Mihawk, such as his quick clash with Vista, or the fact he was blocked by Jozu. So, let's take it chronologically, right from the very beginning. At the start of the Marineford War, Mihawk sends a flying slash at Whitebeard which is intercepted by Jozu. In order to understand why a slash directed at the world's strongest man cannot cut a mere commander, there are two things that need to be addressed. Firstly, Jozu's durability. Jozu is without a doubt one of the most durable characters in the world of One Piece. His Vivre card referred to him as a diamond man with an unparalleled toughness, which can be used to argue that he has the absolute best durability in the entire One Piece verse. The only reason Aokiji could effortlessly take Jozu's arm is because Aokiji throws him to the bone, which completely negates the diamond durability. I really don't see how this effortless attack from Mihawk being intercepted and stopped by Jozu can be bad to Mihawk's portrayal in any way. But then you'll get people saying Mihawk can't cut diamond, which brings me to my second point, the breadth of all things. At the end of Zoro vs Mr. 1, we are introduced to this concept through a mini flashback with Koshiro, who taught Zoro that the pinnacle of swordsmanship is to protect what one wishes to protect and to cut what one wishes to cut. A blade that injures everything it touches isn't really a sword. There are swordsmen in the world who can cut nothing yet cut everything, and this is perfectly demonstrated in that same scene, where Zoro brushes his blade through some leaves that he doesn't intend to cut, and he doesn't cut them, but then he brushes his blade with the exact same motion through a rock that he did intend to cut, and he did cut it. The durability of a leaf versus the durability of a rock, that's pretty self-explanatory, right? This concept of the breadth of all things is integral when trying to understand why a cut that was intended for Whitebeard couldn't cut someone tremendously inferior to him in Jozu. Mihawk did not intend to cut Jozu, he intended to cut Whitebeard. Had his slash been initially directed at Jozu, and had Mihawk wanted to cut Jozu, I'm sure he could have done it. And that is also taking Jozu's insane durability into account. Remember this point about the breadth of all things, because it applies to many moments in the arc. The next instance used to downplay Mihawk is right at the very end of chapter 560, where Mihawk says, "Sorry, Redhead, this power knows no restraint. Now, Fate, how will you deal with this heaven-sent boy? Will his life end here, or will he escape this black blade?" This moment makes it seem as if Mihawk is not going to hold back at all, and that he's going to try to kill Luffy with everything he's got. The fact that Luffy is not just alive today, but didn't even get touched by Mihawk, makes this scene a favourite for Mihawk downplayers. People cannot see him as one of the strongest characters in the verse because of this moment. One of the strongest characters in the verse at full power should easily be able to kill pre-time skip Luffy with relatively low difficulty, right? The problem with this understanding is that Mihawk definitely wasn't going all out. At a very surface level, it seems as if he is going to go all out because he says this power knows no restraint. But what does that really mean? Everybody assumes he's saying that he knows no restraint, but I'm convinced he's actually talking about his sword. He is referencing Yoru and not his own power. We know of swords that have personalities of their own, like Sandai Kitetsu, which Zoro referred to as a problem child, or the obvious example being Enma. Mihawk apologized to Shanks because his intention here isn't to kill Luffy, but rather to test Luffy's luck. He is holding back as much as he physically can, but considering Luffy is so vastly inferior to him, and considering Yoru has power that knows no restraint, holding back as much of his power as physically possible is still too much for a pre-time skip Luffy. That's why he says, will his life end here, or will he escape this black blade? That's why he references fate. From the way this is phrased, it's heavily implied Mihawk's sword has a will and power of its own, and Mihawk is testing Luffy. One of Mihawk's first lines in the manga is, "I am different from those stupid brutes who go all out when hunting a rabbit," and he goes on to pull out a dagger to fight Zoro, who challenges him. Mihawk is unlike those individuals who are always going all out. He is calm, composed. He's the kind of guy to put in only as much effort as is required. Mihawk is perfectly calculated, and this is a staple of his character that one must fully appreciate in order to understand his performance in Marineford. The next scene is actually in the very next chapter, where Luffy is about to attack Mihawk with a bazooka, but is stopped by a vision, some sort of precognition. Luffy has a vision of his hands being cut off if he actually attacks Mihawk, and he freezes, choosing not to attack him out of fear for losing his hands. The fact that Luffy is genuinely afraid of attacking Mihawk here speaks volumes to me. In this entire war, the only time Luffy shows us a hint of fear is in this interaction with Mihawk. Hell, Luffy attacks all 3 admirals at once with unwavering confidence, yet an interaction with Mihawk alone has him questioning whether or not it truly is worth it. We've seen Luffy face off against some of the most powerful individuals in the One Piece verse, but this is the only moment in the entire series where Luffy was truly intimidated by his opponent. And that in of itself is enough for me to really respect Mihawk's performance in Marineford. But we're not done. Right after that, we get one of the most impressive feats in the entire series that is unfortunately heavily slept on by the One Piece fandom. Mihawk effortlessly slices the humongous iceberg or glacier that Aokiji created when he froze Whitebeard Tsunami. He does this without batting an eye. This is an attack intended for Luffy that Luffy managed to dodge, and it ended up becoming one of the most ridiculous feats in the series, completely effortless from Mihawk. This is just as spectacular as Law cutting the Punk Hazard Mountain in half. It's honestly sad that this feat isn't mentioned more in power scaling discussions, because it's genuinely groundbreaking. Next, we arrive at Mihawk vs Vista. This is the Shanks fanbase's absolute favourite moment in One Piece. Every single time you mention Mihawk's power, or say he's stronger than Shanks, they bring up Mihawk versus Vista in order to downplay him, and at this point, I'm not sure if people believe what they're saying or if they're just trolling. Firstly, this isn't a fight, it's a skirmish. I mentioned earlier that Mihawk is always holding back, and that is especially true in this instance. He doesn't go all out against Vista because he doesn't need to. He's literally staring at Luffy the entire time, admiring him, and delivering one of the greatest quotes of the series. Bear in mind, this is a commander of the Whitebeard Pirates. Of course, Yonko level combatants are far superior to commanders, but it's still noteworthy that Mihawk is able to effortlessly keep him at bay whilst barely paying attention to him. Following this comes chapter 570, where Mihawk is chasing Luffy and sends an attack towards him, which is intercepted by Daz's bones. On the surface, this is an embarrassing portrayal. How is Mihawk one of the strongest characters in the verse if he can be intercepted by Mr. One? Well, it's simple, and this is actually like a carbon copy of the Jozu situation. Firstly, Mihawk is obviously holding back and just testing Luffy's luck. Secondly, Mr. One is far more durable than Luffy, who didn't even possess armament Haki at the time. And thirdly, the breath of all things. Mr. One, like Jozu, was far inferior to the person Mihawk intended to cut. However, he was far more durable. Had Mihawk intended to cut Mr. One, he very well could have, and that is canonically proven because in the very next page, Mihawk effortlessly destroys Mr. One with an even simpler slice than his first one. This just goes to show the importance of the breath of all things when it comes to understanding Mihawk in Marineford and just swordsmanship in general. And the last thing I'm going to quickly brush over is something I am appalled I even have to address. Mihawk leaving the battlefield once Shanks arrives. For some reason, people interpret this as Mihawk being afraid of Shanks, which actually might be the dumbest thing I've ever seen from the One Piece community. And like, I've seen One Piece fans say some pretty stupid shit, but this one, I think it takes the cake. Why would Mihawk be afraid of the man whose entire crew he pulled up on alone 500 chapters ago? In what world is Mihawk afraid of Shanks? In fact, he looks down on Shanks because Shanks is crippled and he doesn't see him as somebody worthy enough to challenge him. He literally calls him a one-armed has-been. Mihawk didn't want to fight Shanks out of respect for him as his old rival and potentially even his close friend. We don't know enough about their relationship, but they are friendly, and it's heavily implied that they have some degree of love for each other. The fact I even had to address this is pretty sad, but hey, what are you gonna do? Mihawk has a bounty of 3.59 billion berry. What makes this so astonishing isn't just the massive number, but the fact that the world perceives Buggy as his captain, but he still has a higher bounty than him. A Yonko, his captain Yonko, but Mihawk has a bigger bounty than him. He also has a bigger bounty than Luffy, which means Mihawk is considered a bigger threat than 2 out of 4 of the Yonko. His bounty is just under 500 million less than Shanks's, and he has no crew of his own, no real political power, and from what we can tell, no territory outside of Kuraigana Island. The one thing he does admittedly have above Shanks is the fact that he was once known as the Marine Killer, and he is part of an organization which is directly targeting the Marines, which strongly juxtaposes Shanks's more peaceful approach at communicating with the Navy. Overall though, the bulk of Mihawk's bounty is a product of his sheer power and the threats he poses as a combatant. It is stated explicitly that Mihawk's skill as a swordsman surpasses Shanks's, and as previously explained, swordsmanship and Haki are synonymous. In fact, I'd go as far to say there is no differentiation between sword skill and just general power as a swordsman within One Piece. If you have superior sword skill, you are the superior swordsman. Never has Oda ever made a distinction between skill and strength in One Piece. Katakuri flaunted his superiority over Luffy by mentioning the difference in their skill. When Zoro was wounded against Killer, he rationalized it as a lack of skill. When Apu knocked out Luffy, Zoro praised the Beast Pirate's skill. The Beast Pirate's meritocracy is determined by skill. But in all of those instances, they're actually just talking about overall strength. Oda uses the term skill and strength synonymously within One Piece. And to finally end this video, let me ask you guys a question. Why would Brand New highlight that Mihawk has superior swordsmanship to Shanks if that wasn't what Shanks was known for as a fighter? Why would he place the emphasis on that? Imagine instead of saying Shanks, Oda said Mihawk's swordsmanship was superior to Blackbeard's. It just doesn't make sense. It's not worth emphasizing or even mentioning if Shanks is not a swordsman. And there we go. Wow. With that being said, I think I've addressed everything with regards to this topic. Who do you guys think is stronger, Mihawk or Shanks? Let me know in the comment section who and why, especially if you're choosing Shanks, because I am very interested to hear your arguments. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed.